Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into something raw, vast, and completely unforgiving. Life in the Roman Empire. Not as an emperor, not a senator. No gold laurel crowns, no marble baths. Tonight, you're not Julius Caesar. You're just you, dropped into a world of sandals, sewage, and state-sanctioned crucifixion. So before we get started, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy the content. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always enjoy seeing the range of people tuning in from across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to yelling chickens and a crying baby echoing from down the hallway. Congratulations! You've just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient equivalent of an apartment block. Picture it as a multi-story fire trap, held together with dust, desperation, and questionable masonry. You're likely on the third or fourth floor, which isn't great. The higher up you are, the poorer you are, and the more likely the ceiling caves in if someone upstairs spills olive oil. Your room is tiny, barely the size of a walk-in closet. Stone walls sweat in summer and freeze in winter. No real window, just a hole that lets in smoke, stale air, and the occasional pigeon. Your mattress is filled with straw and lice. The blanket smells like wet wool and bad decisions. No furniture, no decor, definitely no kitchen. You're not allowed to cook indoors. Too risky. One stray ember could burn down the entire building. And there's no fire code. That hasn't been invented yet. Your worldly belongings, one clay cup, a worn tunic, and maybe a wooden comb if you're lucky. Toilet. Nope, not in the room, not in the building. Instead, there's a chamber pot in the corner, watching you silently. You'll need to haul it down some rickety, narrow stairs to dump it into the gutter outside. Hopefully, without tripping and turning yourself into part of the morning street. Sludge. The walls are paper thin. You hear your neighbor praying, coughing, arguing with his wife, and not arguing with his wife, if you catch my drift. The air is thick with smoke, mildew, and the stench of unwashed bodies. Someone's baking bread downstairs, but it's not for you. Street vendors are already shouting prices for figs and fish. Nuts. Somewhere in the distance, a centurion is screaming at someone who's probably already bleeding. You haven't even stepped outside, and you're already sweating, itchy, and possibly inhaling lead dust from the plumbing. Welcome to the Roman workday. You're not elite, not a warrior, not a hero. Just one more poor soul in a crumbling tenement trying to survive until noon without falling down the stairs or angering a minor deity, and you've still got 23 hours to go, now that you've made it down the shaky stairs of your insula. It's time to deal with the next urgent problem, your bladder. There's no toilet in your unit, no sink, no plumbing, not even a humble bucket with any dignity. So you shuffle down the street, chamber pot in one hand, modesty in the other, toward the nearest latrina, Rome's public bathroom. Calling it public is generous. It's more like a group hangout, for strangers with no shame. You arrive and find a long stone bench with several holes cut into it. Beneath that, a shallow stream of water flows, just enough to carry away the city's collective shame. You sit, if you must, and hope the guy next to you doesn't want to start a conversation. Privacy doesn't exist. Doors, forget it. People treat it like a town square, just with better echoes. One man's discussing grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier's going on about his bad back. You're just trying not to make eye contact with the guy across from you who's chewing olives and staring you down. And now comes the real challenge, the tersorium. That's a communal sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or salty water. You're supposed to rinse it before use, in theory. In reality, that sponge has seen things, unspeakable things. You wipe, cautiously, and hope the vinegar did what it was supposed to. If you're lucky, maybe you brought your own cloth. If you're rich, maybe even some moss. But most likely you're using what everyone else used and carrying the quiet shame of shared hygiene, thinking of going in an alley instead? Don't. Public urination is illegal. Fines are real. And Roman law enforcement doesn't issue warnings. When you're done, you go to wash your hands, but there's no soap, no clean water. Just a splash from a communal basin that's touched more fingers than a handshake contest. You leave the latrina feeling lighter, and somehow a little more dead inside. But hey, that's Rome. Now, it's breakfast time, if you can call it that. You've survived the bathroom trip and avoided a fatal slip into the gutter. Time for breakfast, the most important meal of the day, unless you're Roman. In which case, it's mostly a formality. Welcome to the Irontaculum. Your morning feast consists of two things: stale bread and watered-down wine, maybe some cheese, maybe a few olives, but mostly just the taste of disappointment. Forget coffee. Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes, definitely no oat milk. Breakfast isn't supposed to satisfy. It's supposed to keep you from dying. Your bread is likely panis rusticus, a dense, chewy lump of grain and grit, baked yesterday or the day before. It's hard enough to be used as a weapon and textured like dried plaster. The wine is diluted, because even ancient Romans knew being drunk at sunrise was a bad look, unless you were a senator. With no kitchen at home, you eat outside. Standing on the street or crouch by a fountain, gnawing at bread like it owes you money. If you're lucky, you have a splash of olive oil or a smear of garum, Rome's legendary fermented fish sauce. Congrats! You've now added rotten ocean smell to your bland meal. If you were wealthy, you'd get fruit or honey, but you're not. You're just poor enough to envy your neighbor's broken jug of goat milk. Occasionally a vendor strolls by with hot chickpea fritters or sweet pastries, and for a brief moment you feel hope, but then you remember, your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's compassion, so you bite your bread, pretend it's cake, and this is how your day begins, with carbs, thirst, and the realization that you're about to walk several miles on stiff leather sandals, with nothing in your belly but crumbs and regret, and now it's time for work. After your luxurious breakfast of dry bread and existential dread, you head into the Roman workday. Unless you're a senator, a pampered poet with a patron, or someone who inherited land from a rich uncle with no kids, you're working, and working hard. Maybe you're a laborer, porter, potter, bricklayer, or street cleaner. If your luck's really bad, you're a sewer worker. Rome needs infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, temples, baths. Someone has to build them. That someone is you, with your bare hands, in the heat, wearing sandals that offer as much support as a wet napkin. The workday starts early, really early. The sun isn't even up, but your foreman is, yelling, waving a stick. If you're late, you lose a day's pay, or worse. You could be beaten, humiliated, or fired, which in Roman terms means starving to death with your pride intact. Your tools are basic. You dig with a wooden shovel, carry bricks on your back, and haul water from a cistern that smells like damp laundry and crushed dreams. No gloves, no helmets, just dirt, heat, and the awareness that one misstep could end your life and your career. At the same time, if you're a craftsman, good luck. You're competing with dozens of others making the same clay pots, shoes, or tunics. Underpricing is constant, and quality doesn't matter if the customer doesn't like your face. Even more refined jobs like messenger, accountant, or teacher aren't glamorous. You're either sprinting through chaotic streets with scrolls, doing math for someone who forgets your name, or trying to teach Latin to kids who think they're already divine. And women, they're working too, spinning, weaving, selling vegetables, managing stalls, plus raising children, plus keeping the household running, and ideally not dying during childbirth, multitasking before it had a name. If you're lucky, you get a short lunch break. If your boss isn't trying to impress some passing prefect, so yes, you work, or you starve. Rome might be eternal, but your spine won't be. You've survived the morning. No collapse, no beatings. Now comes another challenge, navigating the Roman streets, a chaotic, overcrowded maze, seemingly designed by someone who hated hygiene and personal space. It's midday. The sun is blazing, the city is pulsing, and the street, it's alive, not poetically, literally. Rats, flies, stray dogs, chickens, livestock, beggars, merchants yelling in 6 different languages, kids sprinting in every direction, thieves pretending to help old ladies while stealing your coin pouch. Imagine Times Square, if Times Square had no plumbing and everyone was carrying a goat. Let's talk about infrastructure. Roman roads were a triumph of engineering, straight, sturdy, and expertly built. But they were often flooded with a mix of urine, spilled wine, vomit, and animal waste. And your sandals have zero traction. And the remains of last night's garum spill sit congealing in the middle of the street, which doubles as an open sewer. Step off the raised sidewalk without paying attention, and congratulations, you've just baptized your sandal in the sacred waters of urban misery. Wagons rattle past with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and zero patience. They don't stop for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law banned heavy cart traffic during daytime hours inside the city, meaning drivers now speed through at night, often in the dark, like charioteers on a deadline. If you aren't crushed under a wheel, you'll likely be elbowed aside, whacked with a basket, or shouted at by a fishmonger furious about his spoiled eels. The air doesn't help. It's thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense drifting from temples, and the occasional waft from a public latrine, and dead animals. Sometimes they're just left there. If a dog collapses in the forum, someone might casually toss a cloth over it and move on. Then there are the public spectacles, random fistfights, sudden protests, or parades led by politicians that clog the roads for hours while off-key trumpets assault your ears. In short, the Roman street is alive and it's coming for you. Slip on a fig, get clipped by a rogue wagon, or insult a patrician's pet monkey, and your day might end faster than Caesar on the Ides of March. And all you wanted were some lentils. You're sweaty, dusty, and craving anything cold. The good news? You live in Rome, a city famous for its aqueducts, those brilliant engineering feats that carry fresh water from the hills right into the city's core. The bad news? That water isn't for you, unless you're rich enough to live in a domus, with your own private fountain. Otherwise, you're sharing it with thousands of your closest coughing, sneezing, and non-hand-washing neighbors. Your choices? The public fountains, where people fill jars, wash feet, and occasionally dunk children, either for fun or a vague notion of hygiene. And by hygiene, we mean a wet version of wishful thinking. If you want a full wash, your best bet is the thermae, public Roman baths. They're everywhere and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, right? Here's the catch. The water cycles through multiple pools with no soap, no chlorine, and very little personal space. You'll sit in lukewarm water beside a dozen other men, none of whom believe in modesty. The conversations are loud, political, and occasionally naked. One man might try to sell you socks, while another cleans his ears with a twig. As for the water, it's been through everyone. If you hope to feel clean, think again. You're just marinating in bacteria with a hint of eucalyptus. Also worth noting, much of the plumbing uses lead pipes. Yes, lead. Romans adored engineering, but chemistry not so much. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing might lead to anemia, gout, infertility, or, if you're particularly lucky, madness. Want to play it safe? Drink wine. Seriously, water was often seen as suspicious, especially in poorer neighborhoods, where runoff from streets and latrines contaminated supplies. So wine, diluted with water, became the all-day beverage of choice for men, women, and even children. Because if you're going to endure a crumbling empire, you might as well do it with a light buzz. So yes, Rome pioneered urban water systems before. Most of the world knew what a pipe was. But for the average citizen, drinking, bathing, or rinsing your feet was still a gamble. Enjoy those aqueducts. Just don't rely on them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where suffering isn't just possible. It's the ambient soundtrack of your entire existence. Stub your toe. No ice, no painkillers. You grit your teeth and push through until it heals wrong or falls off. Break a bone, wrap it in a dirty rag and try not to sneeze. Get a splinter. That's how infections start, and how your life might end. Comfort simply isn't a Roman priority. No ergonomic tools, no cushions, no such thing as taking it easy. If you're a laborer, you're hauling bricks with a hernia and a prayer. If you're a soldier, you're marching 20 miles a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite. If you're a woman giving birth, well, prepare for agony. Your midwife may know a chant. That's about it. Every part of your body is one misstep away from becoming an open wound or a cautionary tale. Unless you live near a temple with a devoted healer, your options are homemade ointments, herbal smoke, or ignoring the issue until it goes away, or you do. No anesthesia. Surgeries are done while you scream into a block of wood. Dislocated shoulder. A guy named Marcus will snap it back into place, using techniques he learned from watching someone else mess it up. Dental work? Think blacksmith. Now think mouth. That's the procedure. If you're poor or enslaved, no one even pretends to care. You could be bleeding out on the roadside, and the best you'll get is, don't stain the mosaic. Even Rome's elites romanticized pain. Stoicism was the popular philosophy. Enduring suffering without complaint was considered virtuous. Cry over a broken arm? That's not just pain, it's weakness. Real Romans suffered quietly, and maybe wrote some poetry about it later. So yes, pain is always on the table, usually uninvited, unmedicated, and unacknowledged. On that note, let's explore what happens when you do see a Roman doctor. So, you're injured. Maybe it's an infected blister from yesterday's work, or maybe you tried to shave with a bronze blade, and now your chin looks like a training ground for gladiators. Time for medical help, which, in ancient Rome, is less about healing and more about surviving the treatment. Let's start with the basics. Roman medicine is a blend of Greek philosophy, mystical guesswork, and, oddly, leaves. The central idea? The body is ruled by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feel off? One of them is probably out of balance. The solution? Drain something. Your doctor, who may also cut hair, reaches for leeches or a blade. Bloodletting is the go-to treatment for everything from headaches to heartache. Have a cough, open a vein. Depressed? Let's bleed out the sadness. Surgery. Oh yes, it existed. Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, even bone drills. What they didn't have was anesthesia. You stay awake, gripping the edge of a wooden bench, while a man in a stained toga digs into your flesh with the confidence of someone who once skimmed a scroll. Antiseptics? Not really. They might rinse a wound with wine or vinegar, which kind of helps, but also burns like divine retribution. Infection is common. So is death. Prescriptions were all over the place. Honey, garlic, crushed beetles or a salve made of herbs, ash, and very specific animal dung. If that didn't work, you were told to sleep at a temple and pray for healing dreams from Aesculapius. If that didn't work, your doctor shrugged, your family lit candles, and your neighbors started whispering about omens. It's not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't worked out which remedies healed and which ones made things worse. So next time you sneeze, be thankful for antibiotics and for not living in a world where treatment starts with blood loss. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts, you're starving. Time for dinner, or as the Romans called it, cena, but don't expect comfort food. Let's go over what's not on the menu. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, potatoes, sugar, chocolate, or coffee. None of these ingredients had been discovered or imported yet. This isn't Italian food. It's pre-Italy survival cuisine. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something vaguely hot and definitely brown. It's probably pulse, a porridge made from spelt, lentils, or beans. If you're lucky, it tastes like wet gravel with herbs. If not, it's just the gravel. Protein is scarce unless you caught it, fished it, or trapped it yourself. Meat is expensive, and even when you get it, it's often gone bad. Without refrigeration, Romans preserved food by salting, smoking, or drowning it in garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like death and tastes worse. If you're lucky, you might get boiled. Vegetables, hard cheese, or a fig. The rich, of course, ate flamingo, dormice stuffed with nuts, or jellyfish soaked in vinegar, meals that screamed, "Look how rich I am, and how little I value taste." Wine is always watered down. Drinking it straight, barbaric. Don't worry, the water's probably unsafe too. You just get to choose how quickly you want to get sick. Dessert, maybe dried fruit, maybe nuts, or maybe you're fasting to honor a god who disapproves of indulgence. Napkins? No. You'll either share a communal cloth with 10 others or wipe your hands on your tunic and pretend it's fine. By the end of the meal, your stomach's full but uneasy, and your breath smells like garlic and despair, and a touch of despair. But hey, at least you're fed. Now all that's left is to survive the Roman nightlife. And trust me, it's not the quiet evening stroll you might hope for after a long day filled with grime, sweat, and fish sauce. Maybe you're looking for a bit of relief, something to distract you from the collapsing apartment and the open sewer outside. Well, here's the good news. You're in Rome, a city overflowing with entertainment. The bad news, most of it is terrifying. Let's start with the centerpiece, the Colosseum, Rome's engineering marvel, and the place where your soul quietly checks out. This is where the crowds gather to watch men fight to the death. Wild animals tear apart prisoners. And sometimes, if the emperor wants a spectacle, full-blown naval battles reenacted with actual ships, water, and drowning victims. Attendance is free, which sounds generous until you realize it's meant to distract you while the Senate hikes taxes and quietly adds Armenia to the empire. You sit shoulder to shoulder with sweaty strangers, cheering as a gladiator loses a limb. There's blood, sand, and the occasional public execution with theatrical flair. You're clapping, though you're not sure why. Prefer something more refined? Try the amphitheater for a Roman play. Maybe a tragedy in Latin you barely follow, or a bawdy comedy whose joke is someone pretending to violate Jupiter with a sausage. Nuance is not Rome's strength, more of a sports fan. Head to the Circus Maximus for chariot races, fast, loud, and regularly deadly. No helmets, no barriers, just chaos. The crashes are dramatic, and the crowd loves it. They're there for the violence and the gambling. Just don't root for the wrong team unless you want to fight your way home. There's also street entertainment, fire eaters, acrobats, musicians, tricksters, and occasionally a barefoot philosopher shouting about the meaning of life. If you don't like the current act, wait a few minutes. Someone else will start yelling. But beneath the frenzy, there's a kind of genius. Rome didn't just distract its people, it dazzled them into forgetting how cruel daily life really was. It turned spectacle into a weapon. And if that doesn't dull the pain, there's always more wine. Now let's take a walk through Roman justice. Spoiler, it's not comforting. You've made it through work, dinner, and a gladiator getting skewered for sport. Surely now, the law will protect you if you just keep your head down. That's adorable. In Rome, the law doesn't protect you. It reminds you how small you are. Mercy is for marble statues, not real people. First, your legal status matters. Citizens have rights. In theory, you're not supposed to be flogged in public unless someone important loses patience and you get a trial. Non-citizens, justice is a punch, a branding, or a quiet execution just outside the city gates. Slaves, their property. If one murders a master, even a terrible one, every slave in the household might be executed just to send a message. That message, Don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a civil exchange with a lawyer. Trials are theater. The rich bring witnesses, bribes, and dramatic performances. You bring your tunic and a sense of doom. If you can cry on cue, it might help. No patrons? Pray Jupiter's in a good mood, and that the judge isn't hungover. Punishments aren't just painful, they're designed to scare. Thieves get branded or have their hands shattered. Liars may have their tongues pierced. Fraud? Public whipping. Or exile if you're lucky. Insulting the emperor? That's not jail, it's execution. Usually the creative kind. Some crimes require a public punishment, ideally with a crowd that cheers louder than they did at the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is popular, slow, humiliating, and not just for Jesus. It's reserved for rebels, thieves, and anyone the state wants to make an example of. As for law enforcement, don't count on it. The vigiles, Rome's night watch, are supposed to act as both police and firefighters, but they're poorly paid, overworked, and often corrupt. If you're mugged, they might ignore you. If you bribe them, they might help mug someone else. Sure, Rome has laws, etched in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, not fairness. Now let's talk about the gods. Because here, you're not just obeying men, you're on Jupiter's turf. After navigating the streets and surviving Roman justice, maybe you're hoping religion offers comfort, some peace, a bit of personal reflection. Nope, not here. In the Roman world, religion isn't personal. It's a public institution, wrapped in incense and duty, hovering over every part of your life. You don't choose your gods, they choose you. And there are many. There's a god for everything, Cardia for hinges, Cloacina for sewers, Terminus for boundaries, even Robigus for mildew. You can't walk 10 steps without passing a shrine. Fail to bow, light incense, or whisper a prayer. And you're not just impolite, you're inviting disaster. Maybe not today, but someday. And when your roof collapses, people will mutter, "Ah, he skipped Saturnalia." Religious festivals fill the calendar, dozens each year. On those days, businesses shut down, animals are sacrificed, and the air fills with the smell of roasting bull and wet stone. You attend out of devotion and fear. If the gods aren't properly honored, they retaliate. Plagues, droughts, crop, failures that ruin the lentil harvest. Then there's emperor worship. You're expected to revere the emperor not just as ruler, but as a living god. Burn incense at his altar, sing his praises, never, ever roll your eyes during a triumphal parade. That's basically treason. If you don't show up for public worship, say, "You're a bit too quiet during Vesta's festival," or skip tossing grain into the sacred flame, you might be labeled impious, godless, or worse, suspicious. And in Rome, suspicion spreads like blood in shark-infested waters. If you belong to a foreign cult, keep it hidden. Unless it brings taxes, soldiers, or good wine, the state doesn't trust foreign gods. Roman religion isn't about faith, it's about ritual. You don't need to feel it, you just need to do it, on time, in public, and correctly. And yes, you'd better smile while sacrificing that goat. Speaking of performance, let's climb Rome's greasy ladder of ambition. You've honored the gods, avoided a court case, and survived a public bath without catching something legendary. But now comes the hardest part of Roman life, the social hierarchy. It's a meticulous, unforgiving system where every word, gesture, and sandal strap placement could raise or ruin you. Roman society is a ladder slick with oil and edged with knives. At the top, senators, old money elites in togas with purple stripes, owning land so vast it requires its own infrastructure. Below them, the equestrians, the business elite. Then come the plebeians, like you, middle and working class. Below that, freedmen, foreigners, slaves, and that one guy who insulted a statue of Augustus. Want to move up? You need a patron, a powerful figure who offers protection in exchange for lifelong loyalty, errands, favors, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, landlord, and godfather rolled into one, with a side of smug. Each morning, you visit your patrons. Home in the salutatio. You line up with other clients, compliment his haircut, maybe say something nice about his son's toga. Then you ask for a favor, money, food, a recommendation. If he's feeling generous, he flips you a coin and lets you carry his litter across the forum. Congrats, you're now connected. Every move you make is under scrutiny. Your clothes don't have to be stylish, but they must be clean. Speak properly, choose friends wisely, and whatever you do, don't appear too ambitious. That makes people uneasy, rise too fast, and others will plot your downfall, politically or physically. In Rome, networking is combat, gossip is currency. Say the wrong thing at a banquet and your career ends. Marry the right person and your family's future is secured. But it's all high stakes. Love is for poets. Real marriages are about alliances and property, and even if you do reach the top, don't get comfortable. One bad harvest, one skipped offering, one jealous enemy, and it all disappears. You won't even hear the blade. Now the sun sets. Surely things calm down at night, right? Not in Rome. As the sun dips below the rooftops, you think maybe now, finally, you can rest. But Roman nights don't bring peace, just a shift from chaotic noise to shadowy danger. Let's start with lighting. There isn't much, unless you're wealthy enough to burn oil lamps all night. And most aren't. You're left with moonlight, memory, and hope to guide you through Rome's winding alleys. Drip and fall? No one's helping. They might take your shoes. The vigiles, Rome's night patrol, are meant to prevent fires and stop crime. In reality, they're exhausted, underpaid, and often asleep. A few are brave. Most are bribable. At night, Rome belongs to the outlaws. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional restless ex-gladiator haunt the alleys, waiting for easy targets. If you're walking alone, you're that target. Doesn't matter who you are, unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're vulnerable. And then there's the ever-present threat of fire. Rome's greatest fear after sundown. Those charming insulae, the rickety wooden apartments many sleep in, are more kindling than home. Cooking after dark is illegal for this reason. But hungry. Tenants don't always care. One overturned oil lamp can turn an entire block into a smoldering ruin within hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start on its own, but once it began, it tore through the city like an angry god. You might think your building is safe, until the smell of smoke jolts you awake at midnight. There's no evacuation plan, no fire. Exits, just you, a tunic, your chamber pot, and the sound of collapsing stairs as you run for your life. If it's not fire, it's crime or noise. Rome doesn't sleep. Loud parties echo through the streets. Religious processions parade by with drums and chanting. If a senator's mistress is having a bad night, the whole neighborhood hears about it. Sleep is a luxury. Silence, a myth. And safety, that's reserved for the wealthy, the armed, or the absurdly lucky. But hey, morning's nearly here. You just have to survive one more night, and then do it all over again. When the sun sets over Rome, you might expect quiet, maybe a breeze, a calm dinner, a bit of rest. Think again. Rome doesn't fall silent at night, it just changes. It becomes louder, rougher, more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It hunts. Let's start with fire. Roman apartment buildings, especially the tall wooden insula that house the poor, are disasters waiting to happen. A dropped oil lamp, a forgotten stove, and it's over. Rome doesn't have a true fire department. What it has is the vigils, part fire brigade, part night watch, part severely underpaid janitorial crew. They show up with buckets and hope. If your home catches fire, you might be saved, or become the subject of tomorrow's gossip. Then there are the thieves, pickpockets and cutpursers who treat the moon as a license to hunt. Rome's alleys are dark, narrow, and torchlight is expensive. If you walk alone, you walk by instinct. Don't carry anything flashy, don't look anyone in the eye, and never ever get stuck between two drunk gladiators arguing about a missing sandal. Speaking of drunks, Rome's nightlife is alive and loud. Taverns overflow with cheap wine, bad music, and men shouting terrible poetry to gods and women alike. Brawls break out. Dice games end in blood. Some evenings, an angry noble sends a slave to settle a score with fists in the street. If you see it, pretend you didn't. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. The night belongs to the reckless, the desperate, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep doesn't offer much relief either. Your insula groans like it's ready to collapse. Rats scurry through the walls. A neighbor wheezes like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone screams, maybe from passion, maybe from murder, or maybe both. You press your face into a hot pillow and beg Mercury for silence. But there is no silence in Rome. Not for you. Not ever. Because in the Empire, even darkness makes noise, and when dawn finally comes, you do it all again. You woke. Up in a crumbling insula, survived filthy public toilets, chariot pile-ups, gladiator bloodbaths, toxic lead, and burning rooftops. You choked down lentils drenched in fermented fish sauce. You bowed to gods you don't understand, obeyed laws that don't protect you, and tried to sleep through riots, rats, and the occasional public execution. You're exhausted, dirty, and possibly diseased, emotionally scarred by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Could you last another? Honestly, no. Most. Modern people wouldn't make it to lunchtime. Used to air conditioning, antibiotics, and grocery delivery, we'd give up before the second round of garum. And yet the Romans endured for centuries. Here's the incredible part. In the midst of all this filth, danger, and chaos, Rome functioned. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and arenas. They expanded an empire across continents. They enforced law, debated philosophy, mapped the heavens, performed surgeries, and invented concrete. Yes, the same concrete that still outlasts our modern constructions. They shaped Western civilization. Latin formed the root of half the languages spoken today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, universities, and parliaments. Their political innovations, republics, senates, vetoes, still echo through today's democracies. But it came at a cost. Not for emperors or the marble-bathed elite, but for ordinary Romans. For them, life was a relentless grind, and yet they persisted, because Rome wasn't made of luxury. It was built from fear, sweat, ambition, and survival, layer by layer, person by person, century after brutal century. That's why it lasted. You'd trade every coin in your purse for a hot shower and a chair with a backrest, and that's fine. You don't have to survive ancient Rome. You just have to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, respect that someone long ago walked those same filthy streets and helped build a world so you could sit here today, clean, safe, and a little horrified. Now imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE, royal blood in your veins, a name destined for legend, Rhodogun. And more importantly, you live in a time where your family spends more hours waging wars than throwing banquets. Rhodogun wasn't born into comfort. She grew up with grit, horses, and the constant threat of poisoned dates. Her father, Mithridates, who wasn't a ceremonial figure, he was a conqueror, the one who turned Parthia from a dusty border kingdom into an empire that would one day challenge Rome. But expansion brings complications, rebellions, betrayals, and stubborn neighbors who won't accept new rule. As a young woman, Rhodogun would have seen diplomats argue, generals sketch battle plans in sand, and scribes struggle to track shifting loyalties. She wasn't raised just in silk and ceremony. She learned governance, strategy, and how to wear armor without compromising her earrings. Parthian women, especially noble ones, weren't sidelined. Some ruled cities, others brokered powerful alliances. A few, like Rhodogune, became legends. Not because of who they married, but because of who they defeated. But that part comes later. Even early in life, Rhodogune's name meant something. She was more than a royal. She was a symbol of Parthian strength. She carried the weight of expectation, marry power or become it. And she didn't seem content watching provinces burn from a palace balcony, while other princesses soaked in oils. Rodogune studied military reports, and then came her famous vow. During a rebellion, likely in Media or Babylonia, Rodogune made a public oath. She wouldn't wash or comb her hair until the uprising was crushed. It sounds dramatic, because it was. But it wasn't vanity. It was symbolic, a visible promise that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. That rebellion wasn't minor. It wasn't peasants dodging taxes. It was aristocrats and city leaders challenging royal authority. They captured fortresses, silenced envoys, and told the crown exactly where it could shove its orders. Normally, a king would send a general or an expendable cousin to handle it. But this time, maybe due to timing, maybe politics, maybe just pure royal will, Rodogune herself stepped in. Not behind the scenes, but in full view. She mounted a horse, donned armor, and led troops. Her vow, that messy, unwashed hair, it became a rallying symbol, a reminder that the crown wasn't hiding, it was fighting, and she would keep that promise. Even if it meant going to war with dust in her curls. This isn't over until we win. That rallying cry worked. Soldiers regrouped, not around a delicate royal, but around a leader who let her beauty fade alongside the war. They didn't just see a princess. They saw a commander whose appearance mirrored the battlefield itself, worn, raw, and unwavering. Rodogune embodied Parthian resilience. Not one grounded in thrones and titles, but one born of grit, thorns, and dust. The rebels, meanwhile, weren't sure whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a polished envoy. Instead, they got an unrelenting, unbathed woman charging straight for their gates, steel in her eyes, no patience for negotiation or conditioner. And worse, she was absolutely serious. When Rodogune left the capital, there was no pomp, no parade of nobles tossing petals at her feet. Just cavalry, resolve, and the burden of an empire expecting its descent to be crushed. She looked the part. The elegance of court was gone. Her famously untamed hair had become its own statement, hanging loose like a banner of war-hardened will. In a world obsessed with appearances, she weaponized hers. This was no short campaign. There was no easy siege settled with gold or brute force. The rebel cities were fortified, confident. They had counted on hesitation from the crown, not a determined, dirt-streaked woman galloping through the dust with fury in her stare. But Rodogune never flinched. Her instincts were sharp, possibly sharper than those of many men who'd led before her. She relied on time-tested Parthian tactics, agile movements, feigned retreats, and sudden raids. Her troops would vanish from one side of a rebel city only to reappear the next day at its weakest point. Reports show her soldiers didn't just respect her, they trusted her as a strategist. She wasn't leading from behind, she rode up front. Dirt under her nails, fury beneath her helmet, and as the weeks wore on, so did her hair. By the third month it was said to have twisted into ropes thick with battlefield grime, tangled with dust and the whispered prayers of the dying. But that only amplified her legend, terrifying to enemies, sacred to her own. Rebels called her the Witch Queen, not because she used spells, but because no noblewoman, they reasoned, could endure months in the field, refusing rest and hygiene. Surely something unnatural fueled her. But it wasn't sorcery. It was unbroken discipline. By the time she laid siege to the last rebel city, her myth had grown larger than the rebellion itself. In taverns and tents, soldiers joked. The enemy didn't fear Parthian steel. They feared Rodogune's refusal to wash. And truthfully, they weren't far off. The final rebel stronghold loomed, a fortress city heavily provisioned, smugly confident in its security. Leaders inside had dug in, archers lined the walls, and every gate was reinforced by traitorous arrogance. They thought they could outlast her. That was their mistake. Rodigan's reputation had preceded her, not just across the empire, but into enemy territory. "The woman who won't wash," they whispered. Some claimed her hair had turned to iron, others said she hadn't slept in weeks. Myths accumulated, like siege ladders. But Rodigan was not a myth. She was real, and she had strategy. She didn't charge the gates. Instead, she imposed a slow, grinding siege. Trade routes were cut, messengers intercepted, wells poisoned. The rebels had braced. For swords, they got starvation. She weaponized time, letting rot and fear do the work. All the while, she camped outside the walls, eating with her soldiers, inspecting gear, leading patrols. She still refused to even look at a comb. Her vow had taken on sacred meaning. No one dared joke about it anymore. Her hair had become a living testament, proof that their suffering was not in vain. Every knot whispered, "We are still in this." Inside, rebel morale collapsed. They'd hoped to demoralize the crown with defiance, but it was they who fractured. Arguments broke out among commanders. Food dwindled, desertion rumors spread like fractures in stone. Then came the breaking point, a small gate, left unguarded for just an hour. Whether due to fatigue or treachery, it was found by Rodigan's scouts. That night, under cover of wind and dark, her troops slipped in, opened the gates from within, and by morning, the city was hers. Rodigan, face streaked with ash and sweat, stood atop the battlements, unwashed, triumphant, and utterly formidable. Victory wasn't announced with fanfare, it came with water. After months of dust and siege, Rodigan didn't don royal robes. She wore the same scarred armor she had since the first march. Her face was weathered by sun and strain, and her hair, wild, matted, caked with months of war, hung behind her like a mane forged of iron and legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen, every traitor subdued, and with her vow fulfilled, she could now do what none in the empire dared rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition and stories passed down orally, Rodigan didn't summon her attendants to a private hall. She called them to a public square. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who bled beside her, to witness it. Basins were filled, oils warmed, combs treated like relics brought from storage. There, under the open sky, Pathia's warrior princess, caked in the filth of rebellion, began to cleanse herself. It was more than symbolic. Each tangle undone stood for a reclaimed city. Each rinse of water marked the fall of defiance, soaking into the soil like a blessing restored. Some say she cried, others say she laughed. What no one denies is the silence that fell. Hardened men, burned by sun and scarred by battle, watched in stillness as Rodigan emerged transformed. No crown was placed upon her head. She didn't need one. The dust had crowned her. Her vow had become a power far greater than any jewel. In that moment, Pathia didn't just have a princess. It had a living symbol. She could have returned in glory, let scribes flatter her in verse, nobles clamor for her favor. But she didn't rush back to comfort. She stayed. She shared rations, listened to stories, and understood that her legend was just beginning, and it wouldn't be forged in gold, but in memory. After the now famous washing, Rodigan might have ridden straight to the capital with trumpets and triumph. She didn't. She chose the long way home, stopping at each reclaimed city, inspecting defenses, walking the streets, ensuring no spark of rebellion remained. This wasn't vanity, it was foresight. She understood that the real danger of victory was complacency. Empires fall not just through defeat, but through forgetting why they fought at all. Rodigan reminded them. That Pathian strength wasn't merely cavalry and coin, it was leadership, forged through hardship. a woman who had chosen discomfort over ease and earned loyalty through example, not edict, and loyalty followed her. Wherever she went, people gathered, not to admire royalty, but to witness something real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She listened to grievances, paid for provisions herself, rewarded loyalty, and offered clemency to those who repented deliberately, judiciously. By the time she returned to the royal court, her story had already become myth. Scribes scrambled to record it. Artists debated how to paint her, wild-haired and war-worn or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered anxiously, a woman with armies, oaths kept, and half the provinces behind. What now? Some advised marriage, thinking it might tame her influence. Others proposed she command border forces indefinitely, but Rodigan didn't seem concerned with politics. She had already proved her point. The battlefield had been her throne. The dust, her crown, her name carved into the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no ceremony to endure. She needed no coronation. She already reigned. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with legacy. In the months after her campaign, Rodigan didn't chase attention. Yet it found her all the same. She became the subject of poems, sculptures, rumors, and admiration, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who had served under her returned with a story, and each story added to her legend, making her seem larger, more lasting, and almost unreachable. Yet in the halls of Pathea's palace, where politics slithered behind silk curtains, her quietness was unsettling. She didn't brag, lobby, or ask for lands or honors. Instead, she watched, listened, and understood that the real battlefield had shifted from stone walls to murmured dialogue. Even the king, her father or perhaps her brother, depending on the exact chapter of the tangled Parthenon family tree, had to step carefully. Rodigan wasn't just popular. She commanded respect that few men at court could match. She wasn't admired for beauty or bloodline, but for her leadership, for her authority. She had turned a vow into a political symbol, her unwashed hair into folklore, and her silence, it wasn't passive. It was strategic. She didn't reveal her next move, maybe because she didn't yet know it. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting, wasn't giving orders, wasn't outwitting rebels. She was still. And that stillness unsettled many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? Some historians believe Rodigan used this silence as leverage. Her presence alone, every subtle nod, every glance, shaped decisions. Officials hesitated to push poor policies, fearing her disapproval. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she'd weigh in. Her silence wasn't absence, it was power. She had learned that saying nothing could carry more weight than speaking aloud. So she continued walking the palace corridors, her freshly braided hair laced not just with gold thread, but with memory. Her very existence challenged the norms. She proved Parthenon's strength didn't need to wear a beard or sit on a throne. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities surrendered. And all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest move is not moving at all. Years later, Rodigan's name began to fade from official records. Parthian scribes, eager to glorify kings and dynasties, quietly downplayed her victories. The silence she once wielded as a weapon became the excuse for her erasure. No grand mausoleum stood in her honor. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her image in gold-inked scrolls. But that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't ask for approval to endure. In the outposts where her armies marched, in the villages she spared, her name lingered like a spell. Mothers told her story to daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers passed down her tactics like sacred teachings. Rebels, decades later, still whispered her name as if she might rise again from the dust, hair flying like war banners. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule and still triumphs. Rodigan never accepted a role as palace decoration. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or master the art of being politely ignored. She burned through history like a comet and vanished just as quickly. Historians argue over what became of her. Some say she retired quietly, choosing peace over politics. Others claim she remained behind the scenes, shaping Parthian's strategy from the shadows. A few romantics believe she rode out one last time to resolve a border dispute, disappearing into myth, never confirmed, never denied. But this much is certain. Her legacy lived on where it mattered, in the people. She never wore a crown, yet. She ruled in ways no ornament ever could. She redefined loyalty. She showed that a vow, even one as odd as refusing to comb her hair, could be as binding as any royal decree, and far more inspiring. And though textbooks may offer her only a footnote, the dust of Pathias remembers her. Because you don't need a statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Rodigon's story remains a paradox, well known in whispers, yet scarce in ink. No towering monument bears her likeness, no royal tomb honors her in carved stone, but in the hearts of those who admire rebellion, resilience, and fierce principle, she is immortal. Not remembered like kings, but like storms, like seasons. She didn't need to conquer new lands or sign treaties to be remembered. She conquered expectation in a world where women were told to wait behind curtains while men fought in their names. Rodigan tore down the curtain and walked through, barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it. And the empire didn't fall. It followed. More importantly, she left behind a lesson no law could teach. Loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from watching your leaders suffer beside you, from seeing them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow far longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is. But her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished. It was raw, tangled, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth was dignity. In that vow, a vision of leadership stronger than any crown. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the cause more than her own comfort, and that part history couldn't erase. Even after Parthia crumbled and its cities turned to dust, her name still rises in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers chase her ghost. A vow not to bathe until victory. It may sound absurd to some, but to those who've clawed their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rodigon wasn't about glamour. She was about grit. In the end, it wasn't gold that crowned her. It was dust. The very substance emperors tried to avoid in death was the thing she wore with pride, forgotten by kings, ignored by historians, remembered by the dust. And that's where true legends live, not in stone, but in soil. Before empires clashed and blood darkened the sand, before kings feared her name, Tomius was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the open steppe, wild, raw and free. She came from no marble halls or scholarly cities, but from a brutal, boundless world. This was the land of the Massagetae, nomadic horse archers who rode, like spirits across the plains. Their lives were shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little about Tomius's childhood, but we can imagine its rhythm. She likely learned to ride before she could walk, to shoot before she could form full sentences. Among the Massagetae, girls weren't confined to tents or veiled in silence. They trained with boys, rode with warriors, and carried iron in their blood. To lead, you had to bleed. And even as a young woman, Tomius bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sky and sun, survived off their herds and buried their dead with weapons, ready for the next fight. They built no cities, raised no golden temples, but carried immense pride. When enemies came, they didn't pray, they fired arrows. Tomius likely rose to power after her husband's death, perhaps a former ruler. But what's clear is this: she didn't inherit command, she seized it. In a world where most women were treated as property, Tomius led armies. She negotiated with kings. She spoke as an equal, and when they refused to listen, she made them. She wasn't just a queen, she was Shahut, a war chief in leather and bronze, and soon she would face the greatest empire on earth. But for a woman, power always came at a cost. As Tomius solidified her authority, whispers grew. Across the mountains to the south, one man watched, Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The wind howled across the steppe. Tomius, daughter of warriors, was about to ride into legend. While Tomius ruled the wild plains, a different power was rising to the south, structured, imperial, and unstoppable. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already claimed Lydia and Babylon. His banners stretched across deserts, mountains, and multilingual cities. But Cyrus wasn't finished. He was an empire builder, and builders always look to the horizon. To him, the Massagetae were both threat and opportunity. They lacked gold and cities, but controlled vital land and trade routes. More than that, they had pride, and pride, in Cyrus's eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus wasn't a brute. He had a reputation for diplomacy and cunning, so he chose a different tactic, one used by many kings before him. He proposed marriage. According to Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tomius, offering alliance through matrimony. On paper, it was a royal match, the great Persian king and the fierce queen of the steppe. But Tomius saw it clearly, not as a union of equals, but a clever attempt to absorb her people without war. She refused, and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Persian power. When diplomacy failed, Cyrus turned to his preferred language, war. He ordered his troops to cross the Araxes River, the natural border between Persia and the land of the Massagetae. He would seize by force what Queen Tomyris refused to give, but Tomyris was already preparing. She knew the land. She knew how her people fought, swift and relentless from horseback. And most importantly, she knew that Cyrus wasn't just after territory. He intended to crush the woman who had dared to deny him. The most powerful ruler in the world had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he was about to provoke. Cyrus the Great, seasoned conqueror and master tactician, believed he could outmaneuver this tribal queen. He had faced kings, razed cities, and subdued empires. To him, the Massagetae were merely nomads, feral riders, without cities to defend. What he didn't anticipate was facing someone just as shrewd and far more driven. Tomyris had warned him. After rejecting his marriage proposal, she sent a firm message: "Cross the Araxes, and you'll regret it." But Cyrus crossed anyway, constructing a bridge of boats to move his army into Massagetae territory. Instead of launching a direct attack, Tomyris pulled her troops back, drawing Cyrus further into unfamiliar ground. His forces soon found an abandoned encampment, stocked with food and, more importantly, wine. A rare luxury for the Massagetae and an irresistible temptation for the Persians. It was bait, and Cyrus took it. Believing the enemy had retreated in fear, he left part of his army behind in the camp under the command of his trusted general Harpagus. But under cover of darkness, Tomyris returned. Her warriors stormed the camp, catching the Persians off guard, drunk and unprepared. The ambush was devastating. The fighting was fierce and swift. Among the dead was Spargapises, Tomyris' son and a Massagetae commander. Accounts vary. Some say he was captured alive and chose to end his own life. Others claim he was slain in the chaos. What's certain is that when Tomyris received the news, something inside her broke and then hardened. Her grief was immense, but her fury became the stuff of legend. She sent another message to Cyrus, not a warning this time, but a vow. "You may thirst for blood," she said, "and I will give you your fill." She swore to drench the earth in Persian blood. Cyrus had taken her son and violated her homeland. Now, he would not face the queen of the massage tea. He would face a grieving mother, and she would be the last thing he ever saw. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be a reckoning. As dawn broke over the plains, sharp and brilliant, Tomyris stood at the head of her army. No longer just a monarch, she was a storm incarnate. Her warriors, hardened by life on the steppe, marked their faces with ash and rage. This was no longer about politics, it was about vengeance. Cyrus, for all his military genius, had misjudged the massage tea. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered, disorganized and easy to overwhelm. But Tomyris had been raised among warriors. She knew how to strike with focus and power. She rallied her forces for an all-out assault on the Persian invaders. This time there would be no restraint. The site of the final battle has been lost to history, buried in the vastness of the steppe. But what remains clear is that Tomyris launched a ferocious offensive. Her cavalry moved like a living storm, raining arrows from horseback, charging with axes, and fighting like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, though disciplined and experienced, were not prepared for the precision and fury they encountered. Tomyris didn't command from afar. She fought alongside her warriors. Her presence lit a fire beneath her troops. Every strike they delivered was fueled by her pain. Every charge echoed her vow. Cyrus attempted to hold the line, but it collapsed. The Persian army was routed. Many died in place. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be pursued and cut down. And Cyrus the Great, conqueror of Babylon, of Lydia, of half the known world, fell amid the chaos. Whether he died in battle or was captured and executed depends on the source. But either way, he died on Tomyris's terms. What followed became infamous. According to Herodotus, Tomyris found Cyrus's corpse on the field, ordered his head severed, and submerged it in a wineskin filled with blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you craved." Was it fact or poetic vengeance? Perhaps both. But the message was timeless. Tomyris was not to be defeated. When the dust settled and the ground drank deep, she stood victorious. A warrior queen who had done what no army or ruler before her could. She brought down Cyrus the Great. News of the defeat rippled across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought invincible, had been humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians tried to downplay the disaster, but they couldn't ignore the death of their founder. Cyrus's body was eventually recovered and laid to rest with honor in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. But the shadow of that loss lingered like a scar on the empire's history. For Tomyris and the massage tea, the victory was more than retribution. It was a statement. They had defended their sovereignty not just with arms, but with dignity. Tomyris had defied the world's most powerful king, and she hadn't merely survived, she had prevailed, and then she vanished. No records describe her final years, her death, or who might have followed her. It's as if, after exacting her revenge, Tomyris simply returned to the plains, letting the wind carry her legend forward. In time, historians, poets, and storytellers tried to fill the gaps. She became a symbol. To the Persians, a bitter reminder. To the Greeks, a paradox, a so-called barbarian with more honor than many kings. To the people of Central Asia, she became myth, a ghostly queen riding across the steppe, sword in hand, unyielding. Her story echoed through medieval manuscripts and Renaissance paintings. In each age, she became what was needed: a mourning mother, an avenging warrior, a wild queen, a warning, or a symbol of strength. But through all the interpretations, one truth held firm: she changed history. Tomyris didn't inherit power, she forged it through loss and fury. And for a single, unforgettable moment, this queen of the steppe showed that not all empires rise. some fall to riders with vengeance in their hearts. Most of what we know about Tomyris doesn't come from her people. The Massagete left no tablets or archives. It was a Greek, Herodotus, who immortalized her. Writing a century after her time, he portrayed her as a queen of unmatched resolve and wrath. But Herodotus wasn't simply recording events. He was crafting a narrative, one part chronicle, one part cautionary tale. To him and his readers, Tomyris symbolized a moral reversal. Cyrus, who had conquered so much, was brought down not by a rival empire, but by a mother defending her child. Her story became almost mythical, and Herodotus treated it that way. He included the grisly details, the blood-filled wineskin, the severed head, the damning final words, "Drink your fill." Was it all true? Modern historians continue to debate it. Some suggest Herodotus exaggerated or fictionalized aspects to make a point, to humble Persia, still a threat in his day. Others believe the core of the story, Cyrus's death at Tomyris's hands, is likely true, with the rest being symbolic flourishes. Herodotus, like many ancient writers, viewed other cultures through a Greek lens. He cast the Massagete as noble savages, free-spirited, brave and alien, and Tomyris, within that frame, was not just a barbarian, but a moral foil to Persian ambition. Yet even if the details are blurred, Herodotus succeeded in one crucial way. He made sure Tomyris was remembered. She became more than a historical figure, she became legend. In that space where fact meets myth, her story endures. In a world ruled by emperors and generals, Herodotus left us with a queen who refused to bow, who left her enemies bleeding in the dust. Though she felled one of history's greatest conquerors, Tomyris never ruled an empire. She didn't build cities or carve laws into stone. Her people, the Massagete, were nomads, guided not by walls but by the winds, the horses and the stars. That meant her legacy was not preserved in statues or royal decrees, but in memory. No coins bear her image, no documents preserve her. Commands. Her story lived through firelight tales, song, and the spoken word of warriors. The Massagete were one among several fierce steppe tribes, relatives of the Scythians, Saka, and Dahai. Masters of horseback warfare, they lived between the Caspian Sea and ancient China. Empires feared them for their speed, unpredictability, and battle skill. And while female leaders like Tomyris were rare, they weren't unheard of. Steppe cultures offered women far more freedom than most settled societies. Women rode, hunted, and fought. And Tomyris fought like few ever had, even. Among the Scythians, archaeological evidence confirms tales of warrior women. Graves have been unearthed containing female remains buried alongside weapons, armor, and horse gear, proof that the stories of fierce steppe queens were grounded in reality. Tomyris stood at the height of that legacy. Her authority wasn't inherited or granted by religion. It was earned. Through respect, resilience, and undeniable skill, she united scattered tribes, serving as both political strategist and military commander in a world where survival depended on riding hard, shooting straight, and showing no fear. But because the Massagete left no monuments, Tomyris faded into near myth, her name preserved mainly by foreign chroniclers and the oral traditions of the steppe. To Persian scribes she was a warning, to the Greeks a wonder, to her people perhaps a story passed down in bloodlines and battle chants. A spectral queen who still rode with them in spirit. Empires may be etched into stone, but the stories of the steppe survive in wind and song. Tomyris, grieving, fierce and unbroken, became that voice. Centuries passed, and the empires around the Massagete rose and vanished. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, battled Alexander, and then slipped into historical footnotes. But her legend endured, not in royal courts, but in the hearts of those who refused submission. Across Central Asia, she evolved into more than a monarch. she became a symbol, a figure of feminine strength, resistance, and the untamable spirit. Of the steppe, Tomyris stood for a kind of rebellion that crossed borders. She wasn't Greek, Roman, or Persian. She belonged to no empire. That made her both dangerous and deeply inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, her name survived in adapted forms. Some texts praised her sense of justice and revenge. Others painted her as a savage queen, a reminder that power in a woman's hands could be both noble and unsettling. During the Renaissance, European artists rediscovered her through Herodotus's writings. Paintings showed her clad in elaborate armor, triumphing over the body of Cyrus. In one famous scene, she holds his severed head aloft, bloodied, victorious. The imagery was theatrical, but it carried political weight. These artists were captivated by a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she conquered it. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tomyris became a nationalist figure in countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Writers and educators reclaimed her as a historic heroine, evidence that Central Asian roots were proud, strong, and feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, on monuments, and at state ceremonies. A queen who once ruled from horseback now rode, again in memory, through stories of resistance and cultural pride. In a modern world still grappling with the presence of powerful women, Tomyris is a provocation. She wasn't gentle, saintly, or submissive. She was direct, fierce when needed, and merciful only to the worthy. She embodied resistance and wore the blood of empire like a crown, without apology. History often celebrates those who build cities or draft laws, those who inscribe their names in stone. Tomyris did none of that. She left behind no capital, no palace, no royal archive, yet her name persists, not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be forgotten. She stands against the usual portrayal of historical women, not as side figures, but as central forces. Tomyris didn't wait for recognition. She seized it. She didn't ride behind a king, she opposed one and won. Today, her story is told in classrooms across Europe and Central Asia, not just because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she defied him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending freedom, a freedom not tied to borders, but lived on horseback under open skies, in wild lands. Her statues now rise in the capitals of Central Asia. Her image appears on coins and in official histories. To many, she is a mother of nations, a reminder of a time before Islam, before Soviet control, when identity was formed not in surrender but in defiance, in the rhythm of hooves and the chaos of war. In a world still divided by power, gender, and historical narrative, Tomyris stands as a beacon. Not merely because she felled a king, but because she revealed something greater, that dignity must be claimed, not granted, that leadership may look like a grieving mother who won't let her enemy escape. We often ask why some names survive and others fade. Tomyris endures because she was impossible to forget. In an era when women were expected to disappear behind the walls of tents, she rose, with sword drawn and fury blazing, and carved her place into the core of history. Empires may crumble, statues may fall, but legends ride on. And somewhere across the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still rides, undefeated, unyielding, unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a pastime. It was a structured, state-backed science, endorsed by the divine. Long before modern beekeeping, Egyptians had already established mobile systems for managing bees and harvesting honey. By 2400 BCE, tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara displayed vivid scenes of beekeeping. This wasn't just about food, it was sacred. Integrated into agriculture, medicine, religion, and funerary customs, the practice was central to life. Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, laid on their sides and stacked in rows. They resembled terracotta drain pipes more than today's wooden hives. These were mobile, moved with the seasons along the Nile as floods receded and blossoms bloomed. It was an early form of transhumance, like an ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers used clay or stone tubes to blow smoke into the hives, calming the bees before harvesting. Without protective suits, they relied on timing, experience, and bravery. The honeycombs were carefully removed, and the honey collected not only for consumption but for medicine, mummification, and religious rites. Honey was revered as a divine gift, associated with Ra, the sun god. Egyptian myths said bees were born from Ra's tears as they touched earth. This belief shaped their treatment of bees, not as mere insects but as sacred messengers, bridging the human and divine. Honey appeared in temple offerings, funerary rituals, and even as currency in trade. It was essential in medicine. Ancient papyri recorded over 500 remedies involving honey, mixed with herbs, milk, or wine to treat infections, wounds, and digestive ailments. Its antimicrobial properties were well used, even if the science behind them was unknown. Beeswax, too, had value, used in cosmetics, embalming, and writing tablets. The hive, then, wasn't just a source of sweetness. It was a symbol of order and healing, watched over by both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and spiritual meaning, ancient Mesopotamia brought legal protections. This cradle of civilization, known for innovations in writing and city building, also appreciated the value of bees. Though not as visually documented as in Egypt, beekeeping is referenced in clay tablets and legal codes, revealing a quiet sophistication. Mentions of bee gardens, or nins, appear in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian records. These gardens were often attached to temples or royal grounds, indicating elite control. Honey and wax were used in worship, healing, food, and commerce. Losing a hive was a financial blow, and the law reflected that. The Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE, even addresses beekeeping. If someone's bees swarmed and damaged another's field, they were responsible. If honey was stolen, compensation, sometimes in silver, had to be made. In an economy based mostly on grain, the fact that honey warranted legal attention shows its importance. Mesopotamians didn't see bees only as economic assets. They were sacred too. Some texts linked bees to Ninurta, a god of war and agriculture. Beeswax sealed legal documents and shaped ritual figurines. It bridged bureaucracy and spirituality. While their hive designs remain unclear, scholars suggest they used mud brick or basket-style hives, similar to those in the Levant, kept in shaded gardens or rooftops to protect them from summer heat. Here, beekeeping wasn't ceremonial-like. In Egypt, it was about order, fairness, and protecting valuable resources. The hive was a small but powerful symbol of civilization. In the rugged terrain of Anatolia, the Hittites were early masters of beekeeping too, but their focus was spiritual. Long before the Greeks rose to prominence, the Hittites viewed bees as agents of purity, essential to both farming and the sacred balance of their world. Religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE mention bees not just for honey, but for cleansing rituals. One surviving ritual describes a bee being called to carry away impurity, divine wrath, or evil. The bee was then set free, not killed, suggesting reverence rarely seen in ancient rites. Honey was valued not just for taste, but for spiritual use. It was poured, burned, and offered in libations, mixed with wine, milk, or grain. It was a sacred connector between human offerings and divine acceptance. Hittite hives were likely made of clay or woven straw, possibly kept in sheltered enclosures near temples or royal estates, mirroring practices seen in Egypt and Syria. Beekeeping was likely overseen by temple authorities and tied to seasonal ceremonies. Honey wasn't just a commodity. It was a tool for diplomacy, healing, and divine interaction. The bee, small as it was, held immense symbolic power. The Hittites also made a key observation: bee migration. Surviving records note seasonal swarming, patterns, and flowering cycles, showing their close attention to natural rhythms. In Anatolia, the hum of bees wasn't background noise. It was the spiritual pulse of the land, echoing through the lives of kings and priests alike. The Greeks not only kept bees for honey, they preserved the hive structure, allowing for multiple harvests throughout the season. One of the most influential thinkers in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees extensively in his Historia Animalium. He documented hive behavior with precision, observing that bees seemed to have designated roles. Some gathered nectar, others protected the hive, and one, whom he mistakenly called the king bee, appeared to lead. Despite the gender error, Aristotle's observations laid the foundation for centuries of bee research. Honey held a special place in Greek life. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and enhanced cakes. It was also used in medicinal ointments, especially for treating wounds, and was considered a divine substance. The Greeks believed ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a blend of honey and wine. Bees carried mythological weight too. They were linked to Artemis, goddess of the wild, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, the Greek word for bee. For the Greeks, the bee symbolized sacred femininity and natural order. The hive stood as both a scientific wonder and a spiritual symbol, a living example of discipline, harmony, and divine purpose. Studying bees, they believed, meant studying nature, and perhaps the gods themselves. While the Greeks observed bees with awe, the Romans approached them with ambition. In the Roman Empire, beekeeping was far more than a household task. It became a system scaled to match a civilization that spanned continents. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome turned the beehive into an empire-wide resource. Roman apiculture was built on Greek and Etruscan knowledge, but developed into a formal science. Writers like Varro and Columella documented detailed practices for constructing hives, managing colonies, and harvesting honey. Their records include surprisingly modern insights into swarm behavior, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives varied by region, ranging from hollow logs and cork containers to clay tubes and woven baskets sealed with mud. Adaptability was essential. In colder regions, hives required insulation. In hotter climates, ventilation was key. These adjustments allowed Rome's beekeepers to maintain hives throughout the empire's diverse geography. To pacify bees, Romans used clay, pots filled with smoldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke calmed the hive and may have flavored the honey subtly. Harvesting was done with iron blades, while wax was separated through melting and straining. Wax had many uses: candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even waterproofing ships. Honey was ubiquitous. It flavored wine into balsam, enriched baked goods, and enhanced sauces for meat and fish. Roman athletes and soldiers consumed it for energy. Following Hippocratic traditions, Roman doctors prescribed honey for throat infections, fevers, wounds, and digestive issues. Its antibacterial benefits well understood. What set Roman beekeeping apart was its organization. Large estates often had dedicated apiaries run by enslaved workers and overseen by managers. Honey production was tracked in ledgers, and surplus sold in markets or exported. Bees were seen not just as insects, but as essential contributors to Rome's economy. For the Romans, a successful hive mirrored an ideal household, orderly, industrious, and efficient. Across ancient civilizations, from Egypt to Mesopotamia, bees were more than just honey producers. They were viewed as spiritual beings that crossed between worlds, delivering divine messages and offering sacred substances like honey, which bridged the natural and supernatural. In Egyptian mythology, bees were born from the tears of Ra, the sun god. When his tears touched the earth, they became bees. Honey was offered in temples, used in burial rituals, and associated with eternal life. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt even bore the title, He of the Sedge and the Bee, linking royal authority to the order of the hive. In Greece, bees symbolized feminine spiritual power. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of nature and fertility, were called Melissa or bees. These women were believed to communicate between the divine and human realms. Some accounts claim the Oracle of Delphi was originally led by bee priestesses. Even the Pythia, the Delphic prophetess, was sometimes referred to as the Delphic bee. The hive represented more than biology. It was a model of perfect society, selfless, productive, and unified. Stoic philosophers admired bees for their natural sense of duty. Early Christians later adopted the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, creatures that created but did not desire. In Mesopotamia, bees featured in magical rites. In Hittite ceremonies, a live bee might be released to carry away the community's sins. Honey and wax were used in sacred fires, talismans, and ritual texts. The bee wasn't just a metaphor, it was a divine messenger, a symbol of purity and the sacred mystery of creation. To the ancient world, honey wasn't merely sweet, it was miraculous. Long before the discovery of bacteria, people knew honey healed wounds, soothed coughs, and preserved the dead. It wasn't magic, but it seemed close. Its antibacterial and preservative properties came from its acidity and hydrogen peroxide. Content: natural chemistry far ahead of its time. In Egypt, honey was central to healing. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BCE, lists honey in over 500 remedies. It was mixed with milk, garlic, figs, or herbs to treat infections, burns, and digestive issues. Doctors applied honey as a salve, observing that it sped healing and prevented infection. Greek medicine continued this tradition. Hippocrates prescribed honey for respiratory issues, fatigue, and ulcers. He mixed it with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to reduce fever and clear phlegm. Athletes drank honeyed water during training to replenish energy, believing it outperformed both wine and plain water. In India, the Ayurvedic system recognized honey, madhu, as a powerful healing agent. Texts classified it by taste and source, warning against overheating it, but recommending it for digestive problems, colds, wounds, and even poison. Honey also had spiritual uses, offered in rituals and consumed during fasts for purification. Roman medicine valued honey just as much. Pliny the Elder listed dozens of remedies in his natural history, including honey-based ointments, gargles, and sedatives. After battles, honey was applied to wounds to prevent infection. Mixed with poppy juice, it was used as a sleep aid. Beeswax, too, had medical uses, as a base for balms and even early dental fillings. In essence, honey was more than a treat. It healed the sick, preserved bodies, and symbolized spiritual purity. It was nature's medicine, delivered by the wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers weren't just harvesters. They were skilled artisans, engineers, and close observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed innovative tools and methods to manage hives effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and protect themselves from stings. One of their most important breakthroughs was hive design. The Egyptians popularized cylindrical clay hives, terracotta tubes stacked horizontally. These mimicked natural cavities, were portable and highly durable. The Greeks and Romans also used terracotta and woven hives, some with removable lids, allowing honey to be collected without harming the bees. This was a major step toward sustainable beekeeping. To safely extract honey, beekeepers used smoke to calm the hive. The Greeks developed clay smokers and bellows that directed smoke into hive entrances, which masked alarm pheromones released by guard bees. Romans enhanced this by using aromatic herbs like thyme or oregano, which helped soothe bees and may have influenced the honey's flavor. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice honeycombs carefully. In some cases, combs were pressed for liquid honey, and wax was melted and filtered for reuse. Protective gear was minimal. Keepers relied on experience and technique to avoid stings. Ancient beekeepers paid close attention to bee behavior. They understood swarm patterns, seasonal changes, and the benefits of moving hives to follow blooming plants, a practice now called migratory beekeeping. In some cultures, hives were relocated strategically throughout the year to optimize nectar collection. Storage was also key. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to protect honey from moisture and spoilage. Honey's long shelf life was legendary. Sealed jars found in tombs have remained edible for centuries. Beyond the physical methods, spiritual practices surrounded beekeeping. Rituals were performed to honor bee spirits and deities, believed to secure cooperation and ensure hive health. Maintaining harmony with bees was seen as both a practical and sacred duty. In all, ancient beekeeping blended science, skill, and spirituality. The tools and techniques they developed still influence modern apiculture today. Beekeeping in the ancient world laid the foundation for a relationship between humans and bees that endures today. More than an agricultural task, it shaped medicine, religion, economy, and environmental understanding. From the Nile Valley to the hills of Anatolia, from Greek temples to Roman farms, early beekeepers refined methods to care for colonies and harvest sustainably. Their hive designs, use of smoke, and seasonal strategies allowed for consistent honey yields, crucial for food, trade, and survival. Their respect for bees' natural rhythms fostered a model of coexistence between people and nature. Honey's medicinal uses shaped early pharmacology in Egypt, India, and Rome, with healing practices still reflected in traditional medicine today. Honey's antibacterial and preservative power laid the groundwork for treatments, while beeswax contributed to early innovations in art, cosmetics, and even building materials. Culturally and spiritually, bees and honey held deep meaning. Religious ceremonies honoring bees and their gifts persist across cultures, symbolizing purity, renewal, and divine order. The idea of bees as sacred messengers or emblems of resurrection continues to appear in art, literature, and folklore. Even ancient migratory beekeeping finds echoes in modern agriculture, where commercial hives travel to pollinate crops around the globe. Ancient innovations prepared the way for today's understanding of bees as essential pollinators, whose decline signals broader environmental concerns. Despite our advances, one truth remains unchanged. Humans rely on bees for food, medicine, and ecological balance, and bees have shaped our culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, respect for nature, and the enduring power of cooperation, both within the hive and between species.